Welcome to Technology Tangents. We get leaders together to discuss the important tech of today and the implications for tomorrow. Our discussions are fun, lighthearted, and frankly opinionated, but hopefully give you a sense of what matters, what to pay attention to, and what to ignore. In today's episode, I want to talk about advertising. You guys are excited, I can tell.
I'm out.
Ignore.
Skip. Next episode.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, look, advertising funds nearly every corner of the web today. From your Google searches to your endless doom scrolling on whatever your favorite social media platform to the videos you watch on YouTube. It's fundamentally all underwritten by advertising. In fact, I think what will happen is this world of advertising will radically change. And that's what I want to talk about today. I think we're going to unravel the potential consequences of a world where this stuff, the internet, the commercial model changes and it's no longer underwriting and these things are no longer free as a result. So things like Google or Instagram, what happens if they start charging subscription fees? Do we see an explosion of paywalls across the internet? We're already seeing some of that today thanks to generative AI. I think that only continues. What happens to accessibility and the openness of the internet? What happens to this sort of free endless source of all information independent of your socioeconomic status? Will we change the way that we binge content, whether that be video content, whether that be news content, etc.? Ultimately, we'll also dig into some of the broader economic implications of this. What happens to small businesses, for example? The internet was a great equalizer. Anybody, including my wife, who has a cute little shop, can get anybody in the world to be aware of her company in a way that is actually scalable for small businesses. Quite remarkable, frankly. Finally, we'll talk a little about the alternative funding mechanisms of it all. But that's really the episode. Ready to dive in?
Let's go.
Okay. Well, just to level set a little bit, Jason, you had a fun experience this past weekend. You got your boat, you got some new batteries, and you had an issue. What's fascinating about that issue is you had to buy a new battery, yes?
That is true.
And
because I cannot read the specs online.
And so this was really one of the moments that was this aha moment for me. When you went to choose a new battery, did you go to like your normal websites? Did you Google it? How did you go about your process of evaluating out of a couple of options what is the best option for you?
Yeah, this is not made up for the purposes of the podcast, but I asked ChatGPT what the best one was for the particular use case I had.
And what's remarkable about that to me is it then asked you some questions in response, like where are you fishing? What kind of fishing are you doing? Are you doing tournament fishing? Are you doing casual fishing? What things will be hooked up to said battery? Because apparently boats have a lot of things to power. And where? And then in the actual recommendation you showed me, it actually had contemplated your specific and unique circumstances. It understood that Texas is hot, for example. It understood the cold cranking amps of your engine. It understood the power. It understood everything about your exact situation and gave you a very specific and tailored response. Did you buy the battery?
I did buy it, yes.
And so this is what's so fascinating to me. In the past, we've seen advertising be effectively the market maker. It's really connecting the buyers, the consumers oftentimes, with the suppliers. How do you find out about a good? How do you find out this battery is better for you than not? That's what advertising, the core purpose of advertising was being that market maker. Whether that be brand advertising, commercials on the Super Bowl so you're aware they even make batteries, or whether that be truly tailored websites with blogs or comparisons, or the entire movement of .com effectively was trying to create content that would help people make decisions to buy some good. But what you've demonstrated and what I continue to believe, in fact, I'm actually going to cancel my New York Times subscription because I only have it for the sake of Wirecutter. But it turns out ChatGPT does a better job because not only is it the same information, I can compare the specific models I'm already interested in or discover new ones, but it gives me a tailored and personalized recommendation for me and my circumstances. If that really happens and continues to happen as we've seen now, I think the world of advertising plummets. There is no need for search. There is no need to tell me to play the market maker because there's a much more efficient market maker in the place. we've already seen, The Guardian reported, for example, a 20% drop in ad revenue last year. And I think anyway, that will only continue. So Jason, I'm curious from your standpoint then, as we sort of take this landscape topology that we're starting to paint, how can companies start to leverage generative AI to develop alternative revenue models to traditional ad-based approaches?
Well, I think you've got to separate the advertisers from those with the inventory to display it, right? So if you make a battery, I'll use that example. You want to advertise that battery, so you pay the search engines or whoever owns the inventory to say, like, show my battery. When people talk about batteries, ask about batteries, show my ad. And so you've got two different or two different people in this market, the buyer and the seller, and the answer is probably different for each side, and then the answer is there are probably multiple answers for each side. And I think it's going to be, the original internet didn't have these ads, right? Again, people paid largely by paying AOL. You mentioned that earlier, or paying your ISP. Okay, well, that's pretty much free now. And then the search engines came along. Those originally had no ads, and then eventually they had to find a way to monetize their service. So that's where the advertising came in. But if you think about, I'll talk about the folks like Google and YouTube that are displaying ads or have inventory to display ads. I think for some of those, I don't think it will be impacted, right? So let's take YouTube, for example. You show commercials, right? Like, well, I don't think that, the LLMs and the driving away of search with, giving specific single answers is going to really impact those. That's just like TV shows, kind of entertainment type advertising. Now, people can buy premium, but, they monetize it that way. It's more, I think, on these, like doing a search on battery instead of like showing me ads for batteries. Like if it suggests one and I click on it to go buy it, go buy it. Or if an airline said, I'm searching for a hotel or for a flight, and the AIs can generate like my itinerary, I can say go book it. Essentially, it goes back to the old model, right? Which was there a booking fee for a travel agent? That could be a model or a lead gen kind of pay for the purchase. So there's multiple models like that. I think there's probably models where content providers, like let's say the New York Times, like that data can go into the training. It goes into the training. It's still searching and either training or searching on that data. And maybe there's, we've already seen this. There's some licensing agreements for Reddit and New York Times and these others around to get that data either searched or in licensing. So I think there's like multiple models for each side of the transaction. And, I don't think it becomes one answer. I think that they're all going, everyone is going to have to find the situation that works for them.
Well, the cracks are showing this sort of midlife crisis of advertising model more broadly. It's been crumbling now for a couple of decades, probably. We've seen an increase in fraud. We've seen an increase in or decrease in sort of effectiveness despite the increase in personalization. I think, digital advertising is a huge equalizer for small companies. And we've seen the explosion of Shopify and Etsy and all these sort of, stay-at-home moms, canonical stay-at-home moms who do something on the side to make money while raising kids. In fact, online ads make up about 62% of all small business spending as of 2023. And they spend on average $9,000 to $10,000 a month. So it's a huge investment for a small business. Kevin, from your standpoint, what are some of the strategic pivots that leaders, big and small, I suppose, should be considering to navigate this potential disruption thanks to Gen AI?
It's a softball question there for
it's opening
early
question.
Morning. Yeah. My mind's going, I'm actually going a lot of different spots. It's actually intriguing for me. Everything from going back to, just just how things tend to go back to wherever you're at. What's a subscription model, how you pay for that. I'm also, it's something that I hadn't thought about before, is really the competitive advantage that Amazon will have in the training element, right? So you're thinking about, their whatever alignment they will have with whatever models, but the fact that they've got all the retail data is an interesting element. Like you monetize your product page on Amazon, and then Amazon somehow restricts that from other models in their training. Again, really what I find myself now is I'm going to go learn more about how actually the models are trained, because that's what it kind of speaks to. You have one more thing I'm thinking about, then I'll try to answer the question, is I think it's also one thing that I think is, I've been both troubled and intrigued. Jason, your example of very specific questions give you very specific, and here is the answer. Whereas before you would have Googled, you would have been given a list of ad areas, you wouldn't have had exactly all that stuff, you would have to dig that. I think I'm intrigued with the whole AI models. Give me a Southern pecan pie recipe. I get one, and I don't get 10. And so the good news
in the
is
South, it's pecan.
pecan. I'm from Wisconsin. Calendar. I think that's so. I'm intrigued by that. Will we become so narrow-minded where our ability to critical think about evolving options is going to become so narrow? Because of a tool, we get courted down a funnel that gets us to one answer, which is different than what it is today. So when I come back to advertising, I think you have to look at. There's a lot of different ways. Right now, we have huge supply. You've got all mom and pops. You got all these things, and so you're in a world today where there'll be winners and losers. But I'm intrigued on what's the cost to become a winner. Like you have a scenario where someone gets picked up in a model, all of a sudden, they could have scarcity of what they do, but how you're found, and so.
But, that's true today, right? If we look at this podcast just as a microcosm, we're not making any money off of it, obviously, but still as a microcosm of what happens. One of our episodes it's like a 9-month-old episode on LLMs. During the DeepSeek hype, got picked up and started showing up in Google, YouTube's recommendation. And the number of views for that one video was like 10x what we normally do in a view, just because it happened to pick it up. This sort of random process almost that becomes a huge game. If this were really our livelihood, that we have to have that happen every time. It's amazing how little agency you have in that.
Well, it goes back to you guys are about to release your book, and how do you advertise for the book? Well, you're paying for placement, right? You're paying for specific spots for it to go versus Matt. And I think so that's going to be go back to the original question. Well, I think you're going to have to continue to really know your audience. You're going to have to really have the specific. You're going to have to think about how you capture that, and maybe part of what. The models or the advertising they're going to pay to know that Jason's a fisherman, and how that plays out, and be able to work through that stuff and how that gets. So it's going to be thinking through it. I do get concerned, and again, this is probably a fear that every generation has this new fear that all of a sudden that it's going to just get controlled by the masses versus the small, because it's going to be harder for the small to break in. But I think placement will be more important. Really thinking how you do that. I think the advertising model, the whole, pray and space, spray and pray, right, has been out for a while, and how that plays out. I actually think that's actually good if we have less elements of that. I also think that this goes, consistent themes that we talk about that you have to change, and I think that this is a moment that you're being forced to change. I think probably since mobile, some of the other technology advancements, cloud and stuff like that, didn't change the way you interact with your consumer like digital did in terms of smartphones and that way. This is probably a different way how you interact with your customer. But I do think it's going to ultimately lead to people probably paying. You're already seeing this where you pay for what you want more, which is a model that used to be. And I actually think that's probably in the long run good. But it's going to take a change going back. We've been used to having things free. We're seeing that in lots of different areas right now. This is a really maybe not meant to be a politically charged answer, but I also think it's a little bit like tariffs, right? If you put up the tariff walls, like you have less access to things. Different people have different perspectives, and that's good or bad. But I think that's going to likely happen here too, where you're going to have to pay more to get access to different things, both as a consumer and as a company.
AI actually forces tariffs on the internet.
Yep.
Fascinating. I want to switch to what you just alluded to, which was the zero-click searches, this idea that AI is effectively heisting all the internet traffic. In fact, 60% of Google searches now end without a single click. 60% of the time, people show up to a search engine, type in a query, they go nowhere.
Yeah.
And that's because Google is now giving them the instant answer across a wide domain of problems. And we talked about this with Bing in the past when I worked there, and just what I saw and how do you evaluate these things. Are they good? Are they bad? But regardless, it's a huge difference. More than half of all searches no longer go anywhere. What's fascinating about that to me from a commercial economic standpoint is there was this agreement, this tacit and I suppose explicit agreement too. In the robot file, you could sort of tell Google not to index your site. This agreement that, look, I will create really good content. We spend a lot of energy at Credera putting up blogs, having our people write them, editing them, designing them, getting a graphics for it, making sure it's tight. Why do we do that? Why do we invest all this energy? Well, the hope is that Google indexes that. Somebody searches for something. If we have relevant content, our content then shows up and we drive traffic. If the traffic is never being driven to your website, do we invest in creating all that content? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not. And if we don't have that, then the question becomes, well, who is creating the content of the internet? Who is creating the content that will go into the LLM so it knows what batteries are the pros and cons of each of these batteries? Who's actually doing that process? Because we've changed the economic model here. And so, we've seen this. There's a travel blogger that was talking about this. 40% of their traffic dropped in the past 6 months because you can just go to ChatGPT and say, where would I go? What would I do? It's going to index that information. It's going to recite that information back. Whether it's legal or not, again, courts will decide ultimately, but it certainly is digesting it and then representing it in a new format. And so then the question, I guess, Jason, is, from a technical standpoint, are there strategies that companies can employ to ensure that they are part of, whatever GPT is running of the future? They're part of the zero-click answer.
There's two ways that you get into that. One is in the training, right, and one is in like a real-time search. So the training data, right, I think would be a subscription, but the training data is really teaching the LLM how to speak, right? It's not giving it there may be some parts of the answers, like, if you will, but it is really teaching it how to speak. Like, I think the real-time nature of what products are, you can train an LLM on how to speak, but what battery is for sale today, and it is not going to be in that training data, and how much is it going to cost, and where can I buy it, or what's the weather, right? That's a huge source of one-click, and we saw a lot of that one-click stuff even before LLMs with things like weather and temperature, and so I think people will, again, it will depend largely on some of those, what happens to, Google and others that do the searches. Do they start offering you here's a subscription, here's an API, and, you give us your URL, again, instead of crawling you for free and paying for placement, you've just got to subscribe to put your stuff here, and we'll include it in the real-time search, and we'll send it over to you. And if we send it to you, I think there is some value in presenting multiple options, right? In my case, it's like, here's the three that would be really good. Okay, tell me about each of those three. I think people will use it more as a research tool than get an answer. And then, okay, I would have liked for it to said, I did ask it where I could go buy it, and it did find a place 1.7 miles away. And again, that's in through maps. So again, it's putting your data on maps. It's putting your data in the web. It's putting your data in the search. It's licensing content. Again, it's not one way. You're going to have to be very savvy in how all of these things work so that you're able to get your content. I do think things like the paywall are going to be that's going to be dead, because now that was the ad was the teaser to get you there. Oh, now I got to pay. Well, if there's no content, it's not going to.
But this is where I'm smiling inside, because one of our inside jokes is around EDI and going back to the old models. But I wonder if there's two things here. Looking back in this case actually is an interesting path. So go back to the standard data sheet, or go back to the metadata on a website. But what if what's going to change as a product company is you are not producing anything for a consumer in the way that's going to be produced. You're going to have very simplistic data that can be really run. I go back to classical EDI, the machines talking to machines around that. So, and then, so that's one approach. So you're paying to have that placement to search it. So it doesn't even matter about you, Jason. Vincent, you asked a second ago, are we going to create content? Well, yeah, but what's it going to look like and who's it for? The content may be created for the models versus a consumer. The other thing is, I think that one of the other areas where the original model, you paid for a lead. And so then the advertising changed the need to pay for a lead. Well, what if we go back to that, to really where you're going to monetize is you're going to do greater lead gen. What is that connection? What's the last mile from a ChatGPT response to an actual commerce flow? Well, you're going to sell that particular step. So instead of you having to asking it where to go, it's socialize that for you and go through that. So it's going to mean, so this is where it's kind of fun. You look back a bit to see where we came from. We're just changing the way the commerce flow is going to work. Now, how that plays out, who monetizes it, what's that work with the models? This is why I think it's interesting. I have new respect for Amazon at this moment than I did before, just around the power they have because they have the integrated channel. But it is going to be kind of fun to see what that looks like. But then it's going to also be where, then you get one step further. I can also see a scenario where everything's state funded, meaning, and not state funded. I'm joking when I say that. The answer is always this again. Why is it always this? And so then the models will have to evolve again to be able to give more choice. But I don't know. It's this is actually a fun problem to really think about. And as a company, I think you go back again. I'll keep the theme today going back to where we begin. Know your customer. Know your differentiation. Know why you exist, how it works through it. The more you can specify your product to actually have it be reasonable to why it's different. Going back to Jason's example, this battery does do these things, and it's not just me taking the same battery and spinning the yarn of what it does to fit Jason's interest. I think those are going to be, how do we do that? How you do that at mass scale? Whereas that becomes kind of fun. You really can, as long as you know what you're trying to solve for, generally that's going to be better than, again, just trying to throw something out there.
Yeah, I do think it removes the spin layer, if you will, right? You get the real data, and if the LLMs are unbiased and they do take over search, then you're gonna, one way you could then impact sales is actually make a better battery, right? And drive better and provide better quality data. A lot of first party data, around reviews, driving reviews, and some of these, customer experience things, offer a better warranty. Those kind of things are things where, that is actually, to be honest, that's what made the decision for me on the final two, was it one had a year longer warranty. And so I think there is an element of it's going to impact product, I think. But the one thing we keep talking about, as search is the main use case here, but I actually think one of the main use cases is going to be more video. So you think about YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, billions and billions of hours of video to be, monetized with ads. I mean, I use, I don't know if we can say this, but I use YouTube TV at home for TV, and about, when I'm watching, I guess the things I like are not very popular, but half its commercial spots are empty. They're oh, enjoy the Zen, right? It's the message you get. I think there's a tremendous opportunities for companies to do more kind of video media, that kind of stuff, and really the platforms allow you to get much more targeted than traditional. Let me buy a spot on the Super Bowl, for CBS or whatever. You get very targeted on programming, and YouTube knows who I am and what I watch and what I buy, online. And I think you're going to see, with some of the clean room stuff, very, very micro targeted campaigns, commercials. Now, to your point earlier, the challenge was always that is I couldn't make 100 video. I've got maybe 100 different groups of people, micro groups that buy my product. I can't make 100 video ads, but with generative AI, now you can. So that's the other way I think AI impacts this, is the ability to generate the content, right, to actually display to people. And I do think you'll see some shift there. But I do think that the biggest shift may also be just in product and services themselves having to be more functional. Domino's, I'm going to deliver to a GPS address. It's a new capability. So now if you say, I'm at the park and I want a pizza, well, it's going to recommend Domino's because they can deliver it there.
I think it's interesting around just not so much implication on the pizza, but going back to right before, you think about the dynamic content and the pricing strategies that can be associated with that. Like the whole, that could be a whole other area for companies where now having availability of a product that you can do on-demand video, you can have on-demand pricing based on your current supply. Mm-hmm. So again, we still have to forecast seasonality. All these different attributes go into how we forecast our capacity. If you could literally have that be integrated to where you could be deciding it's the last day of a month, this is where my numbers are. I'm either going to jack my price or going to lower my price based on where that is. That can be pretty compelling, and
it's the airline revenue management problem. Like, does every business start having to revenue manage things like airlines do, where every click, every search, every booking affects the price? When someone schedules a concert in a city, it affects the price. When this sports team wins the game, it affects the price for the next weekend. You have thousands of factors going into those airline pricing models, and do you have to start doing that for batteries, and more traditional commodities? I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think probably the answer to that is yes. That will happen.
I think we're not letting Vincent talk at all today. It's interesting around just our own business.
He talks enough.
In our own business around how we'd love to be able to do more dynamic pricing, real-time supply and demand. But what then leads me to a negative thing that, again, going back to the past, where do you ultimately see this goes to throttling? Goes to other constraints. All of a sudden things come back in, the regulatory of like, well, it's not fair to be able to, Jason gets advertised a battery because he spends X $1,000 a year in fishing. Vincent needs a battery, but he only spends $2 a year, so he doesn't get the same. That's not fair. But yet that's absolutely fair in a competitive perspective. So that's going to be interesting to see how that changes into that.
I think there'll be a lot in this sort of economic disparity moment if really the internet does become a much more sort of subscription-based, paywall-based mechanism. It changes a lot of how our society operates today, and what we're going to be challenged to figure out, is that good, is it bad, and what sort of governance and regulation do we put in place to have a different outcome than would naturally happen left to its own devices. Trying to pick up on this theme you guys were both talking about around this AI personalization. We can close the content gap now, which is amazing. But I'm still not convinced, Jason. I mean, from my standpoint, yes, you can create more videos. Yes, you can create better banner ads that are tailored to me at that moment in time, and that is no doubt better. I'm not sure it's going to be better than what the generative AI running locally that has memory of everything that I typically ask, do, and how I behave can do. So I still think the generative AI will be even more personalized potentially than the ads that you could create. It has more context. What we've seen is that Netflix, for example, attributes 80% of all of its watch time to recommendations, AI-powered recommendations. We know that Amazon's product recommendation drives billions of dollars of revenue. If generative AI is the evolution of that, they can ask you additional questions and really get to the core of your battery situation. Like, what do you really care about? Not what do people like you typically care about, but what do you specifically care about? And as these memories and context windows get bigger and bigger, it may not have to ask you anything. It already knows because you've talked to it about your fishing tournaments. It knows what kind of boat you did because you already bought it. You talked about it with that. You talked about what are your trade-offs typically, how price sensitive are you? It'll have additional pricing models built into it potentially that it could interact with, because I do think that EDI model is going to be the future of content generation. I'm going to just put tons and tons and tons of really ugly but really powerful data that's available to these models that they can interrogate in a variety of novel ways. So I guess my question to you, Jason, really is around what are the technical challenges to implementing that level of personalization that generative AI could then incorporate to its answers?
Does it involve edge blockchain,
Web3.
No, it does not. Well,
Bitcoin.
look, and by the way, I agree with your premise that the models are going to get better and better and more personalized, and I still don't think that gets rid of some of these other forms of advertising, because it's, the explore versus exploit kind of problem, right? There's going to always be new, I'm going to be watching something, and is there, if nothing else, is it experiment to see if there is anything else that might be able to update the local model. But the question was, what does a company need to do to exploit that? Well, again, I think it will depend on what the folks that sell, have the inventory, the Googles and others, what that interface looks like, to use Kevin's phrase of the EDS type interface, are you able to do that? But like in candidly, that's actually easier, right? Because you can publish that data,
Yes.
out of the database in a way that LLM can understand it much easier than you can try to curate content and everything else. You can create thousands of ad combinations and let something serve them up much easier than paying people to try to figure out the winners and losers up front and then manually experiment with them. So I actually think it's going to be largely automated away from what you have today. So, and again, I think, all of the platforms that do that, not just the Googles and YouTubes, but the Trade Desk and everyone else will take care of that largely.
I think it's fascinating. We have a client, a very large consumer client, and one of the things, they have a variety of launches throughout the year for their new product line, largely hardware products. What's fascinating is if you look at that ad cycle today to develop the content, the people on the ground who have to ultimately click the button to deploy these ads across the world don't get information about that product till the very last minute, because they don't want it leaking out. They're a very secretive kind of company in that way. What's even more interesting is the pricing is also determined very last minute, like almost literally the night before. Do they get the prices and the product? Which means you have thousands of people around the world trying to actually tailor that ad to fit the product videos. Now, the good placeholders, they kind of know what it looks like generally, where it will sit. But then more importantly, the prices. And if you think about all the different currencies and all the different ways of formatting, it's a massive burden to get all of these banner ads, to get all of the product placements, to get all the websites up and running at the right moment, literally the same second, ideally, across the world. What's fascinating is one of the ideas that we sort of implemented there, one of the ideas we implemented there was to create a system so that those people all got updated very quickly and could effectively copy and paste. We generally know what that ad should look like. What's more interesting in my mind, and to your point, is if that same database just then were exposed to an LLM, it wouldn't have to format anything. It's instantaneous. If it becomes instantaneous and the cost of that truly goes to zero, then you could finally do what you were saying, Kevin, which is I could do dynamic pricing on the fly. I could effectively give the LLM the weights, or I could ask the LLM for some information and then do the internal calculation and return the answer. But that whole paradigm today is impossible because it's too slow. I can't actually generate a new web page, even if I had a placeholder, in real time for that person. So this would really change the game from that standpoint. I want to pick up the other thing you said, Jason, which is, look, there is a massive downside to this sort of world we're talking about from a consumer standpoint. And that is that if ads go away or they change in a radical way so that you're not being pushed towards you all the time, it's actually more work for the consumer to figure out what's available. It's more work to say, hey, I need this thing, versus just being inundated and filtering. It turns from sort of a push model to a pull model. And so I think that in the example of your battery, you knew you needed a battery, so you went and did research. It wasn't a spontaneous, oh, look, batteries are new. That's cool. Maybe I need to go buy this battery. It really was you doing the work, and I think that's the flip. And so the question is, will consumers like that? Will they not? I don't know. But
I think they absolutely will, because no one wants more email around products and look at our new like the most frequently clicked on thing in my entire computer is the unsubscribe button, and so I think that people are going to very much want that. Like
I guess I'm saying more at a macro scale. Like what happens to the macroeconomics of GDP, for example, if you move to a world where marketers, let's assume marketing works or advertising works, whether it does or doesn't, you could debate, but let's just say it does. They're effectively inducing demand that wouldn't have already been there, at least on the margin. If you suddenly stop inducing all that demand on the margin, at least, that would have a negative impact on GDP because there are fewer people buying fewer things.
Well, that's why I think the Explore, with video is not going to go away. It's going to maybe increase because it's going to look. You're right. You go search, and I'm going to go search, and I need a battery, and I'm going to go search, whatever. But if companies are going to still want to be able to push and try to generate demand, that's going to have to be through other sources than search. It's going to have to be video and other things.
So your perspective is effectively marketing dies, advertising actually becomes bigger.
Yeah.
My counter to that would be if the rest of the services that advertising takes place on today, so think about, all of the affiliate marketing links, imagine all of the web pages that exist today just for the sake of display ads, they're gone. If I'm not paying for YouTube, I'm paying for Instagram, I'm paying for Meta because 99% of the revenue today is solved by ads, and that largely disappears. I don't want to pay to have to then look at ads. I mean, I pay for YouTube Premium, for example, because I don't want to watch ads. I pay for Netflix because I don't want to watch ads. I pay for Disney because I don't want to watch ads. If one of the services said pay and I'm going to show you ads, as I have done, that is now a trend. You're seeing this pick back up now on the streaming services. I literally cancel. I refuse to pay to watch ads.
But well, that's you, right? I had to actually call YouTube and get them to stop showing me the ad for YouTube Premium because I'm like, I'm not paying for it.
Sure.
And so I think that's everyone is gonna, have their own.
You actually called them to tell them to stop. You could have just canceled YouTube.
I went online. And I'll give YouTube.
You have more time than I have.
I'll give YouTube great credit for this. I went online and I'm like, there's got to be a way because literally every time I went on to YouTube, it said, do you want to do premium? I'm like, no. I'm like, how many times do I have to say no? And so I thought there's got to be a way, a setting. So I Googled it, and yes, there's a setting to go, say don't show me that
ad anymore.
Yeah, or offer a premium. Well, I went into the settings, like the video, it's actually a YouTube video showed me to do, and the setting was not there. And so I actually
knew
called,
enough of your behavior that it would piss you off, and so
I called YouTube
took it away.
I don't know. I know this is going to be completely worthless to call and complain about this, but I'm like, hey, I don't have that option. I'm tired of seeing this, and they're like, okay, and I haven't seen it.
That's funny.
But I just think and again as
can we do that for other things? That's kind of interesting.
Think about other modalities that are going to get generated. That whether that be AR, VR, like those things are going to have. Look, what's the old Jurassic Park? It's life finds a way. I say advertising always finds a way. Like who knows? They're gonna maybe it's you pay $20 for ChatGPT, but you get the free version and it'll show you some ads in the response. There's advertising always finds a way.
Well, I think it was I get that, and that's how we fueled. But I'm curious on using a normal cost of building a product, the whole life cycle of a good. And today advertising I think is actually very inefficient, and so that costs the price of the good. So if we envision a world where advertising becomes different, but it becomes more efficient, so now you're putting more into product, or you're putting more into your understanding your customer, or you're putting more into having the widgets. Because I always look at the end of the day, I get a less capable product because it required more money to find me, right? And I'm intrigued on if that money actually went back into, it's the classical generalist versus specialist in terms of our business too. And, I don't know. I'd be curious if it really does become back to the core of what we're doing. It's the good and service that I want. And, and I'm willing to pay for that because it's this experience versus that.
And I that was my Domino's example, but I absolutely think that will happen because also the the AIs drive down the cost of creating a new product or service, and so I can, it doesn't. It's no longer, I don't have to go raise $20 million in VC funds to go create some other service that does exactly what you want. I can go do that, and I can sell to you as a niche, right? And so you get the better experience.
Yeah, I was in with our team in New York this week, and we had bagels yesterday, and they're like all excited about this brand new bagel shop. It's the best bagel stuff, and we've got us down this path. I'm like, well, what's different? I mean, it was plain bagel. It was a sesame bagel. It was really good. And we started getting down this path. Well, was the next best alternative any different, or how did that play out? And then we start joking around, well, how did they find you and all this stuff? And actually the experience of finding the bagel in the bagel shop was actually probably part of why it was getting this more even than the quality of it. So then we started joking, what if you could just like 3D print the bagel? And you kept on going down this path of like really, very intense specialization, and I'm like, I would argue that New York doesn't need one more bagel stand, right? I mean, there's plenty of options for you. So it's intriguing to me around how do you continue to adapt the customer experience around the quality of the good or the need, and if you have access to your customers greater than you've ever had before, does it really become you're tailoring those moments around that versus I spent $15 million on a 15-second spot at the Super Bowl,
and tailoring the product, right? That's the big part of personalization to me. I mean, no one wants a better ad, a better email ad, right? You buy a car with Mercedes, right, and you can spec out that car, and they will make it to your specs. Like that car was one of one made for you.
If you're willing to wait 8 months.
If you're willing to wait, but still, I mean, think about the ability to do that, right? That's an incredible capability. And
but even like this is where it's fun. It's a fun random walk that we're on today, because you go back to the whole concepts we've been talking about, edge, where you're bringing that to the consumer. We'll take that same example. What if Mercedes continues to build the base car, but you're able at the dealer to make the customizations around,
sure.
and or there's some other way to do that. You're actually painting the car and demand the color, right? That's a different way of manufacturing, a different way of thinking about it that I think is actually really cool around that. I think there's a lot of ways that you just got to change and challenge how we work through things.
No, I think that's fascinating and critical.
But that's what I mean by personalization is going to get into the product, not just the ads.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I'm going to take away from thinking a little bit more too. Like, really, what's the relationship now between a company and the training elements of that? That's something I hadn't considered, and really, where's the source? And it's probably a really cool business opportunity actually in between there to help make that simpler. Because right now, I imagine the training is essentially using what's publicly available content. Well, what if I can curate that in ways that monetize the model providers? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that to me, it's really around, we're seeing this maturity model of AI to how you use it to efficiencies. So now we're thinking about how it does change working through it. I'd absolutely, just the way, again, go back to Amazon, the way that Amazon and Google over the last 20, 25 years have radically changed how companies interact. I would think this will be the same, and be thinking about that, but how you would approach that. And then, I guess my goodness and optimistic on this, the end here is that I do think it ultimately comes back, if you provide a good quality and service, you're going to win more than you're not. And so continue to work through that, but then being wise in how you want to do that. And just also, we're going to be prepared for, this is not maybe the negative. I do think that, we talk about hallucinations in terms of data is not what you interpret to be. I mean, I think that's going to be a very strong risk where, it's going to interpret an individual person wrong, and you're going to get something that's going to be interesting how that plays out and how the models get smarter. And so these are fun times. Actually, I think these are fun topics and fun. I mean, I get optimistic about the future when it comes to these type of elements, because it does make it a lot simpler.
I think it's a really interesting question. Just, is it going to move away from the volume, or do you move to this world where everything is bespoke, where it's really truly for you? The cost will necessarily be higher, but maybe it won't be quite as high as Savile Row was back in the day.
Right. Well, again, I always think there's going to be a market for both. It's just what's the relative size of those markets. I think that'll generally mirror population wealth, right? And means I think that there'll be a market for both. Just like, well, I know you want to move on to the next question, but my just follow up to that is, I also think we don't know. When the internet came out, no one envisioned YouTube and social media. In 2000 or 1999.
I did actually.
Okay, besides Vincent. My point is, there are going to be things that we do not see today. There's going to be a new killer app or a new service or a new capability, and so be careful about predicting the future, right?
No, my point, I agree. I think this is the moment that you have to think very critically about what are the elements. What are the sort of frameworks that you should be applying to change your business proactively? Because you will end up blockbuster, is my perspective. If you are not evolving very quickly in this world, you'll end up going the ways of these old companies.
Well, this gets back into my soapbox around being agile, right, and being able to change and develop and deploy things quickly, as being the kind of strategic differentiator, because whatever comes along, whether it be these LLMs and the next iteration and the next and the next, and however Google monetizes that, or YouTube, or if they're able to pull data and generate intelligent responses from your product catalog, all of those things require you to go pivot and make changes quickly. Back to maybe that's my answer to your technological question earlier, is you better be able to pivot and make changes quickly.
Well, speaking of pivot quickly, I can think of no faster way to pivot than having a team of one. What's amazing to me is powered by generative AI, the number of businesses that are doing more than $1 million in ARR is huge. In fact, I found one person who has 3 distinct businesses that are each just him, and he has created $1 million in each of them. It's incredible how quickly these people are moving and how much work they can get done. So my question to you guys is really, this theme is, who is making money in the world of generative AI? We've seen an incredible uptick with ChatGPT and the rate of getting to 1 million users to $100 million in revenue now. We have an incredible number of startups that are very, very small teams. It's no longer $20 million in 2 years with a team of 50 engineers. It's a handful of people and weeks to months to build entire product spaces. I think that there was a great chart that came out recently around how many startups have hit 100 million in ARR in less than a year, and how that continues to get shorter and shorter as a function of time. My question to you, I guess, I'll kick off with you, Kevin. Really, how should leaders evaluate and choose ultimately the new commercial models for their business, and what should they invest in more broadly to hit their business objectives? Or said differently, what are the monetization strategies they should be thinking about?
Yeah, where my mind, shorty, I don't know. But I think that, I think that's, but you need to be thinking about that. You need to be working through that. I think you consistently need to change. And, and maybe that's part of what this season is that, we're in a new element. It's the cycles, right? So, we're literally coming up on the 5-year anniversary of March of 2020. Think about all the different things that changed in immediately following off of that and so that ushered in all kinds of new, consumer models, retail models, communication models. Well, maybe that's part of the thing for the companies today. Is that, hey, you're ushering a brand new way things are going to flow. So, we're talking about themes of personalization, thinking about having product placement, more pricing variability, working through that, maybe changing the way you think about your typical value chain in terms of how you would invest. I think, so I don't have an answer to what would be specific, but besides, you need to be thinking about it. And I think probably also thinking about where you fit into that ecosystem.
How do you create the space for that? As a CEO of a business that has to pay the bills each day, how do you create the space as a leader to have those thoughts, to give yourself the freedom to ask these kinds of questions?
Yeah, it's not easy. The answer, it's a silly answer, but it's prioritization. It's really valuing. I think one thing I would say, we were talking about earlier, we were not today, but in an earlier podcast, we talked consistently around tech debt. Well, when do you do that? And when should you make that investment? And like, I think you have to put that into your overall cost of doing business. I think right now we're at a spot where, again, if you just even take the frame of post-COVID, where it was like, we weren't changing anything. You were just get it faster, get it there, all this stuff. Well, now it might be, no, we are changing. And you have to, if you don't actually prioritize the investment time in that, you're going to miss. And maybe it's possible that the tools that are available will allow us to do some things quicker. And so instead of just trying to do more, maybe we actually then come back in and actually put more in an element of that. I was reminded this week again, I was at a conference, and just the concept of really around, deep work, golden hour, how do we work through this? We're distracted all the different time. And there was one group of folks, they were doing like a pitch type scenario somewhere like, man, be more efficient. Use all that little second. Their solution was, we'll make you more and more efficient, and within 15 minutes, you can design $1 billion idea. I'm like, you probably can't. And there was another group that was saying, you got to carve out specific time and really around the human ingenuity and creativity. And I tend to put myself more in that camp of like, but I think it's so easy to fall into just the rat race. And I think companies right now need to be more focused in development of time. How that works through that connections. You guys know I've been rereading Innovators, and I was reading a chapter last night just around the whole concept of research parks, and the intentionality, having people brought together, and the collision of different ideas of people like eating together, walking together. Now there's a lot of more modern ways that happens, but I think companies being very mindful of that, and really trying to say, part of these next elements of innovation are going to be required by different cross disciplines, people thinking. And so I think as a CEO, I want to allow time for that. And then I want to be able to tie back to part of the why you should work here is because we actually value your mind more than we value your productivity. And that will ultimately drive outcomes. And again, we're in a knowledge business. Different companies have different elements, but I think that's intriguing to me too. And we actually work through that. And I actually think I was with, again, when I was meeting with our youngins in New York this week, they were asking, how is management consulting changing, and how does AI change it? And I think they were kind of, I don't know what they were expecting, but for me, we went on this for me, it was really fun. Like all the ways that all these things I spent years of my early career doing that now get done like that. And just how much more time and thinking that allows the young management consultants of today. You don't have to spend a week consolidating notes and insights. You literally get to actually think about what are the right questions, and we're going to pay you for what you ask. We're going to pay you for what you interpret. We're going to pay you for what you do with that, not just simply you're able to consolidate. And that's so much more fun. And I think that, and it's just that joy of like having it being back to what you do with the tools versus how we use our time.
I love that. Jason, I'll give you one more bite at the apple here on the technology side, which is from a technological infrastructure. What things should leaders be contemplating to enable all the personalization, all the dynamic pricing, all of these elements we've talked about so far today?
Well, I always give the answer of you got to be able to have quick lead times and turn around product changes quickly through, and that requires a whole set of infrastructure, whether you want to call it DevOps or continuous delivery of not just, deployment and testing, but you also have to have good data. We've talked about that a lot. What does your data infrastructure look like? Are you able to get good data to these systems, to these models, to others? And so all of those foundational elements, and it's boring, right? I know it's not exciting like new ideas. It's just boring. But people that have that are able to innovate quickly and then do some of that. I think you talk about some of the Copilot and LLM tools, like, yeah, that's great. Nobody wants to write more XML, right? And they save you some of that time, but you've got to be able to, save across all the aspects of product development, right? From deployment to testing, and having good data and being visibility into them. And those are like real basic, boring blocking and tackling things, but most people don't do them. Most people take, it takes them months and lots of manual effort to go build and deploy things, and it's just not going to be feasible going forward. So I although I think the AI tools do add a new is a new thing in the toolkit to be able to go take advantage of or do things quicker and have faster turnaround times. But this is the law of constraints. You're only going to go as fast as the longest bottleneck allows you to. And as long as those other things, getting good data or having your security team review things or all of those things become the bottleneck, like at some point you won't get any more value out of some of the AI tools.
Seems reasonable to me. I think if we think about what's next then for leaders and organizations, what's certain is change is happening and it's inevitable. Whether that you embrace it or not, you're going to be forced to change. If you don't embrace it, I think you go the way of Blockbuster. If you do embrace it, it's going to be a chaotic moment in time. How do you lead through this chaos is really the core of the next bit here. For example, Gartner is predicting 2.3 million new jobs from generative AI in 2025 and 1.8 million lost jobs. So on the net, it will be positive, but that's a huge churn of a lot of people in this country. How do you lead through that? Yeah. Tesla similarly has reduced production costs by 20%. They tried the full robotic. That didn't work out. So people are going to have to be embracing it as well. So I guess as we close up today, what would you leave leaders with to think about? How are we going to lead through this chaos?
I'll jump in, and it's maybe a bit just biographical where my week is at, but I think you're going to be continuing to, even more so today, you're going to be encouraging and be encouraged by people that are optimistic, that want to learn, curious, growth. And gravitating to people that want to take these different tools and these ideas and expand that just for the pure sake of discovery versus, being in a world like you're constrained by individuals and people that don't want to be here, or maybe it's what's in it for me. And again, I'm not trying to make this have and have nots, but when you reduce the constraint of like, I have to deal with someone who maybe doesn't want to be here because the loss of that person is greater than this. Well, now if I'm able to use technology or other things like that can mitigate that loss in a lot easier way, or like then you're going to be really focused on not only people that are going to want to be exploring and growth, but just, I think that would be really fascinating. What happens if all of a sudden the opportunity cost of losing employees or customers that are hard is a lot easier to move on from? And I'm not trying to, we have to be able to continue to win, but I think like most things, you spend the majority of your time not actually surprising and delighting your best customers, your best employees. It's always trying to the long tail of the folks that you need but aren't really bought in. And I think that'd be actually pretty amazing if you could actually, I'd love to be able to pay the most impactful person in my company versus having to pay them less so I can keep the masses. And so, so I don't know, that's you made a little bit of optimism and hope, but I think that would be really cool. I would love to have us to be able to flow resources for both investment and comp, wherever else, to the right customers, the right people, and be able to do that in a more fairly and what I would say equitable way, but really in a meritocracy way versus trying to have everything go back to the lowest common denominator.
Well, I agree on the discovery, creativity. People have got to learn, invest, got to encourage learning, investing, trying new things. It can sometimes be hard to do that in companies, which become very somewhat ossified. And here's the process. Here are the 8 steps. You move the paper from this side of the desk to that side of the desk, and we've got to. I think the tools. The first thing we have to do is automate that stuff out of the way, so that people can then free up time to go do more kind of creative discovery and learning around how to do that. But if to get paid, right, you're going to come in and you're going to have to still do the 10 manual steps. You're working in the mine and you still got to go up and down the elevator, right? You're not ever going to have time to do that. So it is, and that's part of the modernization and the continuous delivery I talk about, the foundations with data. It's really investing in finding those inefficiencies and automating them out. Like if you don't do that, that is going to be a time drain. You're never going to be able to get to it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it goes back to the early days of Silicon Valley. This is the moment that should be a lot of fun, should be a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
And I think people who embrace that entrepreneurial spirit will have a lot of fun. And I think, frankly, I'd push the envelope wherever you are, whatever you're doing, push the envelope. And you got to do it yourself. I think it's the other part. Especially for leaders, this is one of those moments that if you're not doing it yourself in your job, you're going to come across as, at best, disingenuous.
Yep.
And I don't think you're going to be long for this world. And so I'd say, go try it. If you break something, good. You learned how not to do it. Go try it a different way. This is the moment where everything's going to change. And if you're not at the front, you're going to be at the back. And the back is not going to end well for those people. So thank you guys for engaging in this conversation today. I appreciate it. For our listeners, thanks for joining us. I hope you'll join us again. If you have more questions or want to reach out, the insights page at Credera.com. Thank you.